Hi, Kristen. It's great to see you again today. Your topic today is unraveling shame and other emotions in crisis. So that sounds like a heavy topic for today.
Hi. Hello, my name is Kristin Snowden. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. This is just an informative educational webinar. It's not therapy, so I just want to get that out there. But the previous video I did was kind of on identifying and understanding what shame is and how it kind of shows up in your life. And that's just kind of a surface beginning the steps to understanding. The second webinar I want to do builds on top of that. And it's saying that basically many clients who are chiming into these webinars, viewing these things on YouTube, are in emotional crisis. They have, uncovered some very, very traumatizing information. They may be in a very toxic or unhealthy cycle with somebody, and the emotional level is high and intense and in crisis mode. And so this video is dedicated to giving those clients or those viewers an opportunity, kind of a roadmap of how to start unraveling those emotions and those heightened crisis moments. So because I implore all of you to take the time. It's kind of this catch-22 that when you're in crisis, when you're in an emotionally intense moment, you feel like the last thing in the world that you need to do is stop and pause and take the time to unravel this deeply painful stuff. But I promise you, it is 100 times more damaging if you don't put the time and energy into this process. So let me just give you a quick summary of my last video on kind of the difference between shame, guilt, humiliation, and embarrassment. So let's say I'm sitting at a clinical staff meeting and my boss tells me, hey, all of you have been doing a really great job keeping up your files and your paperwork, except Kristen, you filled out several items wrong. I need you to go back to your office immediately and redo all of them. We've done a lot of informative emails on how to fill them out correctly. I'm not really sure why you keep doing it wrong. Please go back. And so obviously the perfectionist side of me, or someone who wants to be a good therapist or be perceived as someone who's a good worker, confident, I'm in deep emotional intensity in that moment. So the way Brene Brown says it is, all of a sudden you find that you're emotionally hooked. Your blood pressure shoots up through the sky. You feel attacked. Your thoughts start ruminating. Your face kind of pushes out tingling feelings of heat, and that is like all the signs that you need to stop and pause and break this stuff down. So, okay, what's going on for me? There's probably 4 main emotions that might be going on in that moment. It's guilt, humiliation, embarrassment, and shame. So let's go for humiliation. Humiliation is that idea that you didn't really deserve that, right? So you're walking out, maybe your close colleague, and I'm like, damn, why did my clinical director just call me out like that? I mean, I think a few of us didn't fill out our paperwork correctly. I don't know if I deserve to just kind of be called out in front of everybody, or gosh, I really wish that she would have pulled me aside and told me this stuff. It's really, humiliating to be kind of zero laser focused in on that moment, right? So that's humiliation, is the idea of like, oh, I'm upset because I don't feel like I deserved that, but I'm willing to share that with another person. Another thing that I'm usually willing to share when I'm breaking this apart is embarrassment. So this idea that like, wow, that was really uncomfortable and I really didn't like it, but I think it's an experience that a lot of people would understand and would get. So again, I'd be willing probably to talk to a colleague about that and say, wow, that was really embarrassing when she just completely called me out in front of everybody. Maybe I'd seen her do it 3 or 4 other times to other people, and everyone's been having a hard time completing their paperwork in the right way. So I have this kind of understanding that it's a problem that we all deal with. And so that's a feeling of embarrassment. So, oh, wow, that just happened. But I know there's this kind of knowing and understanding and compassion to be able to share that part of the story with. Guilt is that really uncomfortable feeling that is actually productive because it's telling you you can do better next time. You made some mistakes. So you're right. There was a lot of email that was sent out recently giving you very specific details on how to fill that paperwork out correctly. You were really busy and you didn't have time to read it. So you just kind of filled out your paperwork flying by the seat of your pants and you got called out for it. So that's the guilt, yucky feeling of like, okay, this is my part in this. I need to do better about this. Like, this is where I did something wrong. And then the shame part is the part that is deeply, deeply unconsciously woven in all of that. And that's where I always challenge clients to not talk about the content, but the context, the big picture yucky stuff that's going on, which is that feeling that I am wrong. That, it's not, the guilt is I made a mistake. Shame is I am a mistake. So I'm feeling that horrible ruminating thoughts, high blood pressure, tingling in my face because it's like, oh my gosh, they're on to me. I'm a terrible employee. I'm completely incompetent and I screw up all the time. And I really don't know how to balance my life to the point that I can't even fill out paperwork correctly. That's the shame voice. That's the voice that I don't go seek out a colleague or a friend to go process. That's that in the back of my brain, in that fight, flight, or freeze, pain triggering part of my brain that stays silent. And the problem with not calling that out, speaking it out, sharing it with others is that, we're going to talk about what happens when you don't unravel that. And it kind of gets offloaded onto other people and other situations in an incongruent, ineffective way of processing it. So that's kind of a basic scenario of the beginning parts of, okay, let's unravel. Let's take a minute. I am in a level of emotional reactivity right now. I'm feeling really strong feelings about something. I need to stop and pause. So, and I want to tell you that in a scenario like that, you can experience all of those emotions all at the same time. That's something that I really want you to get. So I always, when I'm in deep pain or I feel like I'm in a crisis or have a lot of emotions going on, I have to stop and really kind of vet out everything. And something that I love that Brene Brown was mentioning is that we like to think that we're like intellectual thinking people, like beings, but actually we are emotional beings that emote and then sometimes think on the side. And just because we feel things all the time, we're constantly feeling things, like having emotional responses, thinking and feeling things. I think we believe or we assume that we are kind of effective or knowledgeable in knowing how to unravel that spider web. But really, I mean, she gives this example, like I fly on a plane every day. I know how to get on a plane. I know what a plane looks like. I know what it's like, but I am not a pilot. I know nothing about how to fly the plane. Like, you need special training to actually learn how to vet your feelings, how to break them apart, how to put language to them, how to process them. So, and again, I want to emphasize that when you're in crisis, you feel like this is the last thing in the world you want to do is take time to really be like, oh, I'm in deep pain. Let's figure out what this pain is. But I implore you that that's one of the most effective things you can do in these states. So she really encourages everyone to get curious about these feelings. And it's important to explore what kind of environment too you were in growing up. Was there any environment that was saying, hey, how do you feel today? Really, why? And you were encouraged to connect your thoughts and your feelings and kind of talk about them, or was it discouraged? It was a kind of pull yourself up from the bootstraps and keep going, armor up and let's go. Let's produce, let's win, let's do those kind of things. So was it discouraged to show feeling and then want to talk about it? So there's a place to start. And then she talks about there are ways that if we do not stop and pause and explore these emotionally intense moments and kind of unravel the shame and the pain and the different emotions going on, then we will be in a state of offloading the pain. So I can't handle the discomfort that I'm being faced with right now. So I'm going to kind of bleh it out in a different way. Freud, Freud, that famous psychiatrist, talked about this stuff too. And he talks about it in terms of defense mechanisms, right? That we don't like the discomfort of uncomfortable feelings, anxiety, etc. So we have these defense mechanisms. So that's another way of interpreting this process. But so let me just explain a couple of the ways that we will offload emotion instead of properly vet it, process it, unravel it, understand it, and kind of rewrite it into our story. We act, she calls it chandeliering, but it's just that we act much more stoic. So we put up this front that everything's okay. And then someone might push a little button and we explode because we are kind of winding ourselves so tight, trying to put on that strong front for everybody. Like I said, a lot of the people watching these webinars are dealing with intense hurt and pain, and you're just trying to take care of your kids and keep the finances in check and go out into that community and not lose your stuff in front of everybody. But then let's say, one neighbor or one child's mom asked the wrong question in the wrong way, and you just bite their head off in a really incongruent way. So that's an example of that. Is like, if that happens, that's not anything to shame yourself about. It's a sign that you are offloading pain in an indirect way, and you need to stop and pause and figure out a way of unraveling it in a healthier way. So some other examples are, instead of experiencing the emotion and vetting it, like that example I gave of the guilt and the shame and the humiliation and the embarrassment that I felt in that emotionally intense moment. Instead, I just blame, I get angry, or I avoid. So let's say I didn't process that emotion enough, and instead I just let it boil up inside of me. And, I get stoic about it and I hide it and pretend like it's not a big deal. And then I just avoid my clinical director entirely, because I blame her. I think she's a terrible clinical director. She didn't educate me enough on how to fill out my paperwork the right way. I get really angry at my family and kids because they keep me so busy. I didn't have time to check my email. It's coming out in every way, but focusing in on that moment and the messages that I was receiving from that exact moment. Another common way that we deal with this pain and discomfort in an ineffective way is we numb it, right? So we do whatever we got to do to take the edge off the pain, to escape from it. So we abuse substances, we overshop, we overeat, we overspend. We maybe will, if I'm dealing with something at my work that's too uncomfortable because it's dealing with my incompetency and my shame about that, instead I'll just focus in on all these other people that are totally incompetent, or other people that I can focus my intensity and I can focus on their drama and all the craziness going on with them, because I don't want to look at myself and my stuff. Right. So I numb and I distract, anything to just take my focus off of what's going on here. Another thing that Brene Brown always emphasizes, and when I tell my clients all the time who are trying to stay in recovery, is you have to realize that you can't just selectively numb out the painful parts of life. The consequences of using any kind of numbing and distracting is that you are numbing and distracting from the greatest parts of life too. So you're never actually fully able to receive joy and love and connection, because you're too focused in on numbing out anything uncomfortable potentially. So the other two ways that we kind of push off emotion and don't manage it correctly or effectively, she calls it stockpiling. So we push the emotion down, we shove it down, and we think that it's like, oh, whatever, I'm not going to die on that bridge. I'm just going to ignore the comment that he made, or I'm just going to ignore this and that. And you push it away, but the body keeps score, and you wonder why you can't sleep at night, or you have high levels of anxiety all day long, or you are deeply depressed or deeply paralyzed, or you feel nauseous all the time, or you have autoimmune issues going on. There's incredible studies going on right now where just they're looking at so many people who have autoimmune diseases. And I'm not saying this is across the board, there's definitely exceptions. And they're looking and they have severely traumatized backgrounds where it's like that's the way their body has managed this, keeping this severe trauma inside of them. They have these autoimmune diseases that are just ripping them apart. So, and then you get stuck in that emotion is the consequence too, if you're not processing it out, vetting it, and unraveling these emotions. So you kind of will own, okay, yeah, I'm upset. So let's say I talked to that colleague and I'm like, wow, I feel really embarrassed that happened. And I can't believe she did that. But then I don't also vet and process the fact that it makes me feel incompetent, that I'm a bad therapist, that I can't manage my life. You have to, because usually the fears that I can let like a little bit out, but I need to close that gate because I'm afraid the floodgates are going to open and then I'm going to lose my stuff and I'm not going to be able to function anymore. But the problem is that you just get stuck in that cycle and it never kind of gets fleshed out and dealt with and processed. So that's a common lie that I think that we tell ourselves is, oh yeah, I'm processing my pain. I'm telling, but it's just really, it's like the one little tiny facets of it that you're comfortable with talking about because you really don't want to go to the shame part. That's like, oh my gosh, if I really own that part, I'm going to be in the fetal position, completely unfunctioning, because that's the scariest thought in my life. But we do need to go there because it has to be processed. Obviously, that's with a professional, a helping professional in your life. So the goal is to completely unravel these emotions, get an understanding for them, talk to trusted loved ones that are healthy and or professionals who can help you kind of create those maps and guide you through the muckiness of vetting and unraveling your emotions. From the Brene Brown perspective, she believes in writing your story. She has this saying that if you let your story, if you don't write the story will write you, and so you have to kind of take charge and say, so the end point of me vetting would be like, no, Kristin, you're not a bad therapist. You're not incompetent. You do struggle with time management, and getting your paperwork done correctly and on time has got to be a priority. And so maybe you do need to spend a little bit more time. You need to ask your clinical director for something, maybe for extension, something, in order to get this done right. And maybe also, if it was humiliating being called out in front of everybody, ask her next time if there's a problem, if instead it can just be conducted between me and her. And maybe even if it's really bothering me, say, hey, when you called me out like that, the story in my head I'm telling myself is that you think I'm completely incompetent and that you don't value me as an employee. And then maybe we can hash out that kind of discussion as well. And that would hopefully be all the different dynamics that I would need to be able to move on from that emotionally intense moment and kind of move on free and not held at gunpoint to that story and to that emotionally intense moment. And obviously when you're in crisis, there's many of those baby moments that you really need to stop and kind of unravel each one of those moments as they happen, because the more crisis and the more intense and the more moment after moment after moment that happens in these difficult relationships and betrayal and all that kind of stuff, you're going to have to really start working on it. But it is like anything in life, the more practice you have behind it, the more automatic the process will become. And that's it.
Well, that's a lot. That really great stuff. It's interesting because after you did the one, talking about shame and how it's basically a useless, there's nothing that's going to be good that comes from it. We're just telling ourselves negative messages, where guilt can help us motivate and go, okay, I need to work on my paperwork or whatever, or I need to hire an assistant to help me, or whatever it is that could be helpful and motivating, and shame isn't. So, it's come up a number of times in different drop-in groups and different things. And even in my real world life, and I've thought about how ineffective shame is that it doesn't have any positive particular, the whole thing is I am useless, I am of no worth, and all of that, it isn't a good message. The getting curious, well, actually, I want to back up. When you talked about like all the emotions, you can be experiencing multiple emotions at one time, I was like, wow. And to unpack that, to take a pause is difficult, but to take a pause and go, I'm feeling more than one thing, and let me think about how I'm feeling about this, I think is particularly difficult, especially, when we're talking, there's a lot of people, obviously, they're reaching out that are betrayed partners. And so they're getting the layer upon layer upon layer. And so finding that, or like you talked about too, with the numbing out the addicts. I mean, that is exactly, what is happening with the addict is like, I can't experience any emotion. And I remember that personally, like re-entering the world and experiencing emotion, good or bad, was intense and very unpleasant. And people said, "What are you feeling?" And I was like, "I don't know. I'm feeling a lot, and I hate it." And I mean, I literally said that. I was like, it's just too much. And if I could have crawled in and put a lid over my head, I would have done it, because I just was, it was painful. Even if it was good emotion, it was difficult. So, when partners talk about, their reactive spouses who are just starting recovery, and it's not an excuse at all, but it, I just want to let you know how difficult it is to try not to act out and to live in the world with emotions. Like you talked about being incongruent, totally incongruent. My parts are all over the place. I'm trying to align them. I don't have the skills and tools to do it. So it's a process, and it needs, I think, like you mentioned too, good professional help to do that. I also hear so many partners who are living in the trauma, or have been living with the trauma for a long time, who have had physical manifestations, like you talked about the autoimmune. Hear that all the time. So I'm glad they're doing some research on that as well, because I do think, like, you alluded to Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's book, with The Body Keeps Score. I think that that's a huge thing. And we as a society don't do a great job of supporting mental health in general, I think, but also understanding the physical correlation to that. I mean, even when you're talking about there's a physical manifestation, my blood pressure rises, heat in the face, tingling, all of those things, I was thinking, I believe that all those are true. But I was like, I wonder if in a moment I'm aware of that. I think my face flushing, I would, because, embarrassment or something like that, and having my face heat up, I think I would notice that. But, all the other things, I don't even know if I would, be able to pause and notice those things. So I love that you're sharing. Here's some ideas on how to pause, to take in, even just taking in the moment and start looking at really what it is. Is challenging, but really worthwhile doing. You talked about the floodgates too, and I thought, I always think of a pressure cooker, and I'm willing to pop the steam hole and let a little bit out. But gosh, I can't even imagine. It'd be like opening a pressure cooker that's under pressure and everything exploding. That's my visual for it. So like, I'm only willing to do just a little bit, just enough to make it tolerable. But you're never really getting to that underlying, all the stuff that hurts, or whatever unpleasant, emotional thing is going on. So lots of great stuff. So
yeah, there's a couple like little sayings or questions that she has that might be good to help guide people when they're in these like dark moments of things that, again, you might not feel it like a physical reaction, but you find yourself doing these certain behaviors. And so we all have different ways of starting to realize, like, oh my gosh, I'm in an emotionally intense moment. I feel like the walls close in on me suddenly, and my hearing gets like hollow. That's the other thing when I hear something intense. I don't know what's happening, but I just want to hide. So if that's like your reaction, that's the stop. Like, what's going on? Why do you want to hide from what? What's going on? What was said? What was done? I just know I want to punch a wall. So that's kind of me. I'm not a wall puncher, but when I feel myself revving up for like an attack, I know I'm in like some kind of shame storm because I'm a kind of puff my chest up, defend myself at all costs kind of thing. So obviously I'm in shame or some level of humiliation, embarrassment, and guilt because of something that happened, and I need to pause for that. Like if I'm feeling myself revving up for an attack, I need to pause for that. I want Oreos, just lots of them. Or I just want carbs, right? It's like I just a lot of people have that where they just like, I need to go eat some chocolate cake. I need to go eat ice cream. There's a food therapy piece to that. I guess sometimes that's okay, but if it's done obsessively and compulsively, you need to stop and pause and explore what's going on there, because there's probably an emotional storm going on that you're not willing to see. Or I feel, and then you try to put a connection to that, like a disappointed, regretful, pissed, hurt, angry, brokenhearted, confused, scared, worried. I am, in a lot of pain, feeling really vulnerable, in a shame storm, embarrassed, overwhelmed, in a world of hurt, or just my stomach. Oftentimes we feel like we're going to throw up, or your stomach's in knots. And then there's just a lot of kind of second questions to, start asking yourself. For reference point, a lot of this is based on the Rising Strong book by Brene Brown, which kind of breaks this down just so you know if you're curious. But some secondary questions when you realize you're in this emotionally intense moment is like, why am I being so hard on everyone around me today? Or why am I being so hard on myself? Why do I feel like I'm getting set off so easily? What did I get to the point? How did I get to the point that I want to punch this wall? Like, what's happened? I want to dig in and figure out why I'm so overwhelmed. I can't stop thinking about this conversation. Why? Things to just really start stirring up your curiosity and trying to just get you into that space where you are allowed to stop and pause, and know when you're in this emotional intensity, you don't skip through this. Do not let yourself go on autopilot. Stop and make everything very conscious in those moments. And I promise you'll be much happier with the way things turn out than if you were left in your default autopilot system. That's where the scary stuff happens.
Well, and I think you talked about it too, the stockpiling it. I always think of it as like putting the stuff up in the closet shelf. I'm just shoving more stuff up on the closet shelf, and I'll get to that later, but I don't ever really get to it. So the stockpiling is the same thing. So if I take a pause and deal with this, I'm not layering and adding on to all the other stuff that's stuck in the closet that hasn't been attended to as well. So
right.
I've noticed people too, and it's probably part of the flight, fight or freeze too. But like the deer in the headlights look, I mean, I've witnessed that on people who are, in one of those moments, and it's like so unsettled. I think I can see it easier in someone else than I would maybe notice it in myself. But like, someone in a crisis like that, I've witnessed that like, can't focus on any particular thing or face, or like there's nothing safe in the moment, that whole reaction.
Yeah, you usually, especially from the outside looking in, you'll be able to observe someone in a physical state. And so that's usually my cue, is I will feel something physical. But that's, again, coming from someone who is very cerebral. I like to think I too fell for that idea that I was a thinking being, and I loved it up in my head where I could rationalize things and make lists and like complete formulas. But I'm not. I'm a feeling person. I had a lot of stuff going on below from my chin down that I didn't want to connect with. I didn't want to explore. It was a scary, uncharted land of a lot of kind of untapped in hurt and pain. And I just never thought I was going to have the communication. I just didn't even know what I didn't know. And it's tough work.
It is. The guys that are coming to the Seeking Integrity Los Angeles program for relationship and intimacy disorders, and it is completely, they have, they're using sexual behavior, porn addiction, whatever, to disconnect from any kind of real intimacy, and so that program is designed to help them reconnect or connect. I mean, like you talked about too, it's like you said, what was your messages growing up? And some of them never had a safe place to explore emotions. It was more, I'll give you something to cry about, or you can't, there isn't space in the family for you to have needs or emotions, like,
Right.
and you hear that often, and it's obviously sad, but this is to help them find that space to be able to connect and integrate and be congruent rather than the broken pieces.
Right.
Well, good stuff. So you took a very hard topic and you've given us some definite things that we can do to make it through. So here's a question for you, Kristin. At this point, after so much betrayal trauma, how can you go back and address each shame storm after working with a therapist using the codependent model? I feel like my shame was shamed. Oh, I'm sorry about the codependence. So, we really are working on getting the prodependent language out there. So, but for 30 years, it's been all about codependency. So,
Right.
So thoughts on that? How do you address them?
Well, I first want to validate her. I actually just had a partner of a client say, where do I go now that I just unraveled that, my partner's been acting out sexually for many, many years. And she said, because I cannot go to my therapist because she will tell me to leave him immediately and I'd be dumb if I didn't. And that broke my heart to hear me say that, because she wanted to stay with her partner, even though he'd done some really horrible things. But they were both on a path where there was willingness, and it broke my heart that she was kind of on top of the trauma she was already experiencing. She was almost being re-traumatized, going like, where do I go where I can actually find someone who's going to support me in the fact that I want to move forward in this way? Right? Because we need a lot of support during that time because the shame storms are so brutal. But so I just want to validate that part. But how do you go back? What's the beautiful thing about life is that if you hadn't dealt with it in the past, it's going to keep delivering it to you today. So if there are these regular messages or shame messages that are telling you that you're emotionally unstable, or you pick the worst partners, or you're not valueless, or you're not valuable, or you're not sexy enough, or anything, you will find that they will keep coming up in moment after moment, crisis moment after crisis moment, emotionally intense moment after emotionally intense moment. So I guess, yes, if it's significant enough that you remember it, you can see yourself in that room, you can remember the conversation that was so traumatizing and so shaming, then yeah, go back to it. EMDR is a great way to kind of go back to those moments, work through those trauma moments. The great therapists, I think, will be asking you about the shame messages and the shame voices that are involved with that, so you can kind of vet through that and unravel all those pieces to it. But I find most of these shame messages are deeply wound in every one of our emotionally intense experiences. So the same messages I think I was hearing and so fearful of when I was a kid, I think I still find them today. Some of my trauma has added other ones to them that I didn't struggle with until until after significant traumas. So they come back, or new ones exist. But they'll keep surfacing, and so it's just be curious, be aware, and I hope that you can use some of the skills that I was giving you to kind of start exploring what they are.
And I so agree with that. And let's call it a gift that keeps regiving. But it's one of those things where I kept having. I even named it my white hot rage. It would come out of nowhere. That's what it felt like. Like I'd be just fine, and next thing I know, I'm rage. And like I didn't want to have to go make amends, So I would contain it to the best of my ability. But like I am sure that everybody it just emoted off me. And I finally was like, this is not serving me well. And I went to my therapist and who did EMDR with me, and it all went back to hurt. And I had to go back to some of the early hurt for me to work on that. And I'm grateful to say that doing that work and being kind to myself, but I've not experienced that white hot rage since that time. So I was able to process through something that was recurring but old in a very effective way with a professional help. And I didn't have to go, for years and years on that particular thing. That was one of those where I went for a specific issue, we addressed it, and gratefully it's not, come back. So, I do think that they do layer up, but, if you can work on kind of that root issue, it seems to, and really get some healing around that. For me, at least, it was, that kind of took care of a whole bunch of the shame storms and hurt storms and everything else that followed in its wake.
Right.
Any other questions or comments? We love questions and comments. So, yeah.
And we are back next month to going back to the Wednesdays, the first Wednesdays of every month. This was just because of my training. We did it on this random Wednesday.
Yes, but I would also like to share, we've added on the Prodependence Partner Support drop-in groups. We filled in the rest of the month. So we have,
awesome.
Yes, so every week at this time there is something. So, it's no longer, well, which day, so working on having a consistent schedule will help, I think, so. Well, I don't see any other questions or comments. So I want to thank you again it's always great to partner with you on these type of things. It's like, there's so much good content and really very practical advice for how to move through very difficult topics.
Great. Yeah, well, I always enjoy, you're always welcome to email me or ask me questions offline if there's any other questions.
Great. Well, until next month, I'll see you then.
Well, I guess in 2 weeks technically, but
exactly. Yeah. Oh wait, there's a question. There's a question.
Oh no, it's just thank you.
All right.
You're welcome.
Bye everybody.
All right, bye. Thank you.